Hi, my name is Evan Miller, and for Case 5, I decided to revisit some of the course material around queuing theory and simulation. I recently had a personal experience in the Seattle emergency room and decided this would be a great thing to investigate and how it could be further improved. So, Seattle area emergency departments are inefficient, resulting in unsafe average wait times of 2.5 hours. An analysis using queuing theory and simulation confirms that increasing staff by just one provider per site and implementing pooling across hospitals could decrease wait times by 60% and lower provider utilization by 13%. Currently, wait times are simply unacceptable, and it makes really common sense that that can further lead to complications. Research shows that long boarding times are often linked to higher mortality, misdiagnoses, and longer hospital stays. The average national time spent in the emergency department is 2.5 hours, with only about 30 minutes or so being the actual care for the patient. In my analysis, I investigated 3 different hospitals that are well known in the Seattle area, but have different sizes and different resources available to them. A smaller hospital in the University of Washington, a medium-sized hospital for Evergreen Health, and a larger hospital in Harborview Medical Center. For the queuing analysis, each of these hospitals follow mostly the same model with some different parameters. I assume in this model, location, and really the bottleneck is the number of workers available at each location. So given that the national average was about 2.5 hours, I worked backwards from there and made some reasonable assumptions about the number of providers that would be available and the average rate of patients. So for University of Washington, it is 9 patients per hour with about 5 providers available. For Evergreen Health, it's about 12 patients per hour with 6 providers available. And for the larger hospital, Harborview Medical Center, 15 patients at 8 providers. And what I found here, at least in the initial queuing analysis, is that with these numbers, the utilization is almost 100%, and the queue sizes range from 14 to about 30. So doing an investigation further into the utilization, simply by increasing the number of providers at each site dramatically decreases the utilization and the average wait time. Taking University of Washington as an example, going from 5 providers to 6, the expected queue sizes drop from 21 to about 2, the utilization drops from 96 to about 80%, and the average wait time down from 150 minutes to about 44.6. Now, this holds for each hospital I did the analysis of. In addition to doing a queuing analysis, I also used a generative AI tool to create a simulation. A video on the right kind of shows how each hospital is simulated in the arrival time and how the queue size grows and the utilization of each in particular patient room. In addition, there's also statistics calculated, and we can compare that to what was expected in the queuing theory and what changes by increasing the available providers. So in all cases, again, the simulation here corroborates what we've seen in queuing theory analysis. By increasing the number of providers available, we can see a pretty dramatic drop off in the wait times for each hospital. Now, each hospital that I investigated operates independently, and there's no transparency as to the queuing or triaging that takes place. And so part of this investigation was also, what if these hospitals talk to one another? What if you could actually pool patients together and triage them in terms of what location to go to? So using that same tool for simulation, we can see what that would look like. And an analysis of these numbers show that the arrivals, when pooled together, about 36 patients per hour. There are 19 available providers, and the average wait time dramatically decreases from 2.5 hours to about half an hour. While this is a very interesting decrease, it's just a simulation, and it's somewhat infeasible for patients to teleport to their particular hospital. So I decided to take this a little bit further and consider where patients might actually originate from when they have an emergency. So I used a tool to randomly distribute patient events from a specific location and then take that into account for the model that I was using. So I'm using a uniform distribution across the Seattle area. I'm excluding locations where it would be a incident that occurred in a body of water, because we have a lot of that around here. It's about a 15-mile radius, and I'm assuming that there's an average travel speed of about 25 miles per hour, and the distance traveled is bird's eye view. So not taking the actual roads and highways into account, but just making an estimate that you go from point A to point B as fast as possible. Taking that into account and putting that into a triage, I was able to simulate over 1,000 hours of this triaging and take into account the actual travel time to get there as part of the end-to-end patient experience. And what I found was, when pulled together and using some of the increased provider numbers shown before, we're able to get the time in the system down to just about 50 minutes. So that includes the time for transit for a patient to actually get to the hospital, as well as the average wait time for them to receive treatment. So, in conclusion, staffing can make a really big difference in both the patient and provider experience. We saw a very big fall off between the wait time that patients experience, and we got away from the really high utilization from the provider experience. Again, that was close to about 100%. That drops down to around 80 or so across all three of these hospitals. Pooling also leads to a generally healthier Seattle. Allocating resources accordingly shows that there's less of a likelihood patients in conflict going to the wrong hospital and just getting there and waiting. So that also leads to further efficiencies, and additional investments in modeling can further drive these efficiencies. So I made several fundamental assumptions here. I think if Seattle were to take this into account, it would see great increases in the patient experience, provider experience with relatively low cost. Thank you.